Part 1: The Hook and the Dangerous Moment. Lowe's Angels, early 1947, Chasen's Restaurant, Beverly Boulevard. The booth is half-shadowed red leather warmed by cigarette smoke and expensive wool. Ice settles in a glass, someone laughs too loudly, a waiter disappears. Hedda Hopper lifts her champagne. It is not a large gesture, just a small tilt of the wrist. The light catches the rim of the glass and the white of her hat, wide, theatrical, unmistakable. She does not stand, she does not ask for attention. She already has it. Across from her, John Garfield leans back with the posture of a man who knows he is being watched. He is 34, dark hair combed straight back, eyes sharp, a face built for close-ups. Warner Bros. Turned him into a star, the public thinks he is untouchable. Beside them sits Harry Cohn, Columbia Pictures, thick cigar between his fingers, heavy-lidded eyes that never quite close. He does not smile often, tonight he looks amused. Hopper's glass stays raised. "To friend," she says softly. The room hums, silverware moves, a producer at the next table gestures with a fork mid-story. Hopper doesn't finish the toast. She turns her eyes to Garfield. "And to those who will be very cooperative." A pause. The word hangs in the air longer than it should. Cohn's cigar stops moving. The producer at the next table lowers his fork without realizing it. Even the waiter near the bar looks over, sensing something shift without knowing why. Garfield does not blink immediately. He smiles. But it arrives late. Just a fraction too late. And everyone in that booth understands what just happened. Because in 1947, in Hollywood, cooperative does not mean friendly. It means Washington. It means testimony. It means names. The glass lowers. No one laughs. Hopper takes a sip as if she has said nothing at all. Garfield feels the eyes on him, not just hers, Cohn's, the room, the invisible ones that matter more. He clears his throat. Cooperative with what, Hedda? His voice is calm, too calm. The kind of calm actors use when they are trying not to reveal the first flicker of something underneath. Hopper dabs the corner of her mouth with a napkin. She does not answer immediately. She enjoys silence. "It's such a shame," she says lightly, "when promising men make things difficult for themselves." Another pause. Not long. Just long enough. Harry Cohn exhales smoke through his nose, slowly. He does not interrupt. He does not defend his actor. That, more than anything, is what tightens Garfield's jaw. Because if this were gossip, Cohn would laugh. If this were a joke, Cohn would wave it away. But Cohn is listening. And Garfield knows it. The clink of glass on glass from somewhere behind them sounds too sharp. Hopper leans in slightly, her perfume cuts through the smoke. "Washington has questions," she says, "and they don't like silence." There it is. Not an accusation. Not a threat. Just information. Delivered publicly. Garfield feels heat crawl up the back of his neck, not anger, calculation. He has heard the rumors, everyone has. The House Committee on Un-American Activities has already begun sniffing around Hollywood, screenwriters first, directors, meetings from the 1930s resurrected like old debts. Garfield attended meetings once, benefits, anti-fascist rallies before the war, the kind half of Hollywood attended when it was fashionable to hate Hitler. But now the war is over. And alliances have shifted. The word communist carries a different temperature. Cohn finally speaks. "You've got nothing to worry about," he says without looking at Garfield. It sounds reassuring. It is not. Because Cohn is not speaking to Garfield. He is speaking to Hopper. The message is quiet and clear. If there is trouble, the studio will not bleed for it. Garfield leans forward slightly now. His smile returns, smaller. "I've always been cooperative," he says. Hopper's eyes sharpen. "Yes," she replies, "that's what we're all hopping." The waiter reappears as if summoned by tension. He asks if anyone would like another round. No one answers at first. Cohn waves him off. Garfield reaches for his glass but does not drink. In the corner of the room, a columnist from another paper pretends not to stare. Hedda Hopper's column runs in more than 100 newspapers. She can build a career in a paragraph. She can end one in a sentence. Studio heads read her before breakfast. If she writes that John Garfield is uncooperative, doors will close before subpoenas ever arrive. That is the power in the room. Not police. Not handcuffs. Ink. Garfield understands this. He has always understood power. He grew up in New York tenements. He knows when a room shifts against him. And the room has shifted. He studies Cone now. Waiting. But Cone does nothing. Because Cone is already thinking ahead: contracts, insurance, public image, risk. Garfield is talented. But he is not irreplaceable. Hopper adjusts her hat. You know, she says almost kindly, it would be tragic if audiences began to question your loyalties. The word lands heavier than the others. Loyalties. Not talent. Not box office. Loyalties. Garfield's eyes flicker for just a second. There. That's what she wanted. He realizes something then: this isn't gossip, it isn't curiosity. It's positioning. Hopper is aligning herself publicly with Washington before the hearings escalate. She is offering Cone the opportunity to distance himself early. And she is letting Garfield know he is already on a list. Without ever saying the word. The producer at the next table resumes speaking, but more quietly. The entire restaurant feels like it has leaned in. Garfield finally takes a sip. His hand is steady. He sets the glass down carefully. Well, he says, I suppose we'll all find out soon enough. Hopper smiles. A small satisfied smile. Sooner than you think. And just like that, the moment passes. The waiter returns. The noise rises again. Someone at the bar laughs too loudly. But something irreversible has happened in that booth. A sentence has been spoken. A warning has been delivered. And John Garfield, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, has just been told in front of a studio head and a columnist that the question is no longer whether Washington will come. It's whether he will kneel when it does. Garfield forces another smile. But this time it doesn't reach his eyes. He understands the rules of Hollywood. He just doesn't yet understand how far they are willing to go. And Hedda Hopper knows exactly how far she is willing to push. Outside, Beverly Boulevard glows under streetlights. Inside, careers are being measured. And no one in that booth will ever admit what was said. But everyone will remember it. Because in that single word, cooperative, the future tightened. And John Garfield stopped smiling. Part 2: The Pressure. Silence and Hidden Consequences. The next morning, the newspapers did not mention John Garfield. That was the first sign. Hedda Hopper's column ran as it always did: sharp, chatty, laced with inside access. She wrote about casting rumors, studio feuds, a contract negotiation between MGM and a rising Engano. But buried 3 paragraphs down was a line that most readers skimmed past. Some of our more intense young stars would be wise to remember that patriotism photographs better than protest. No names. None were needed. In Hollywood, you learn to read between lines. Harry Cohn read it over breakfast. He did not call Garfield, he did not defend him, he did not ask questions. He called his legal department instead. Across town, John Garfield read the same column in his kitchen. His wife, Roberta, poured coffee without speaking. The radio murmured quietly in the background: news from Washington, committees, investigations, loyalty. Garfield folded the paper slowly. He had grown up poor in the Lower East Side. He understood coded language. He knew when a sentence wasn't just a sentence. Hopper had not accused him of anything. She had warned him. And she had warned the industry at the same time. The calls began before noon. Not from friends. From people who wanted to know where he stood. A producer asked casually whether Garfield planned to make any public statements about recent concerns. A director, more blunt, suggested he clear things up quickly. An old acquaintance from a 1930s theater group advised him to distance himself from those meetings. Those meetings. The anti-fascist benefits, the Spanish Civil War fundraisers, the labor rallies, perfectly legal at the time, patriotic even. But 1947 had changed the temperature. Now those old photographs were liabilities. Garfield understood the mechanics of fear. He had played tough men on screen, boxers, gangsters, soldiers with something to prove, but this was different. This was not a punch. This was erosion. The House Committee on Un-American Activities had already called in the Hollywood 10 writers and directors who refused to answer questions about Communist Party membership. They cited the First Amendment. They were cited for contempt. Studios were watching closely. So were columnists. Garfield had never joined the Communist Party. That would later matter less than he imagined. Perception was enough. By the end of the week, Harry Cohn summoned him to Columbia's Gower Street office. The office was large but dim, heavy desk, thick curtains drawn against the afternoon glare. Cohn preferred shadows, he liked to control what was visible. Garfield entered without smiling. Cohn did not rise. "You've got friends in interesting places," Cohn said, flipping through a folder without looking up. Garfield remained standing. "I've got friends everywhere. That's the problem." Cohn finally looked at him. "Washington is circling. Hedda hears things before subpoenas are printed. When she talks, I listen." Garfield said nothing. Silence again. Cohn leaned back. "They're going to ask you questions." "About what?" Cohn's eyes hardened. "Don't insult me." Garfield felt something tighten in his chest. He knew the script now. Cohn continued. "If they call you, you cooperate fully." There it was again. Cooperate. The same word from Chasen's. Different room, same pressure. "And if I do?" Garfield asked. Cohn didn't answer immediately. He stubbed out his cigar with deliberate care. "Then Columbia won't have you under contract." Simple. Clean. No anger. Just business. Garfield studied him. This was not personal. Cohn admired talent, but he worshipped survival. Studios were already drafting internal policies, informal blacklists forming quietly before they were ever announced publicly. Actors were assets, and assets could be dropped. Garfield left the office without shaking hands. Outside, the California sun felt harsher than usual. Within days, the invitations slowed. A script he had been promised stalled for revisions. A dinner engagement with a studio executive was postponed indefinitely. A radio appearance was quietly replaced. No official statement, no public accusation. Just distance. At home, the phone rang less often. Friends became cautious. One evening, an old colleague from the group theater visited him. The man closed the curtains before speaking. "They're going to make examples," he whispered. "You know that." Garfield nodded. "They want names." The word hung heavier than anything Hopper had said. Names meant betrayal. Names meant safety. Garfield paced slowly across his living room. "I'm not a communist," he said quietly. The colleague didn't respond. It wasn't about membership. It was about compliance. Weeks passed. Washington announced new hearings, more subpoenas, more testimonies broadcast on radio. Hedda Hopper's columns sharpened. She praised brave Americans who stepped forward to assist investigators. She criticized those who hid behind technicalities. Again, no names. But the net was tightening. At social gatherings, conversations stalled when Garfield entered, not because he was disliked. Because he was dangerous. Guilt by association moved faster than proof. He began noticing small things. Studio guards who once waved now checked identification. Publicists who once strategized now suggested he lay low. One afternoon, Garfield received a quiet call from his agent. "They're preparing a list," the agent said, unofficial but very real. "Whose list?" "Everyone." That was the truth of it. Studios, network sponsors, insurance companies. Fear was contagious. The following week, a reporter approached Garfield outside a soundstage. "Mr. Garfield, do you consider yourself loyal to the United States?" The question was asked lightly, as if it were routine. Garfield stopped walking. He looked at the reporter for a long second. "Yes," he said. But he knew that wasn't the question being asked. What they wanted was confession. Or denunciation. Or both. At night, he replayed the moment at Chasen's. Hopper's raised glass. The word cooperative. He realized something unsettling. The subpoena might not have existed yet that night. But the decision had already been made. Hopper had positioned him publicly. Cohn had prepared privately. Washington would follow. Fear in Hollywood didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with glances, with columns, with contracts quietly reconsidered. Garfield began to feel isolated inside his own success. And then, in the fall of 1951, the subpoena finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just a formal envelope delivered by hand. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. The room felt very quiet. The same kind of quiet as that booth at Chasen's. Only now there was no champagne. No smile. Just paper. And a question he could no longer avoid. Would he be cooperative? Washington, D.C., October 1951. The hearing room is colder than it looks on camera. High ceilings, hardwood chairs, microphones positioned like quiet weapons along a long table, the seal of the United States mounted behind men who do not smile. John Garfield sits alone. No studio head beside him, no columnist raising a glass. Just a nameplate. And a question already waiting. He has rehearsed this moment in his head for years, since Chasen's, since the word cooperative first hovered in the air like perfume that wouldn't fade. The chairman adjusts his glasses. "Mr. Garfield," he begins, voice steady, almost bored, "are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" The room does not react. But it tightens. Garfield leans slightly toward the microphone. "No," he says. "It is the truth." The committee members exchange brief glances, papers shuffle. "Have you attended meetings sponsored by communist organizations?" The question is narrower now, more precise. Garfield pauses. He understands the trap. Attendance becomes sympathy, sympathy becomes affiliation. "I have attended meetings supporting anti-fascist causes before the war," he answers carefully, "as did many Americans." He keeps his tone controlled, respectful, not defiant. He has chosen his strategy. He will not name names. He will not confess to something he did not do. But he will not attack the committee either. He is threading a needle in a room built to tear fabric. The questions continue. Names of writers, directors, actors from the 1930s, some already blacklisted, some cooperating, some vanished. "Did you ever observe Mr. at a Communist Party gathering?" Garfield's hands rest on the table, still. "I decline to answer questions that would injure others." There it is. A boundary. Not loud. Not theatrical. But clear. The air shifts. The committee does not shout, they do not need to. They thank him for his testimony. The hearing ends without spectacle. Garfield walks out into the gray Washington afternoon. Reporters call his name. He does not stop. He returns to Los Angeles quieter than he left. No arrest. No handcuffs. No dramatic headlines. But something has changed. Columbia Pictures does not renew his contract. Privately, Harry Cohn calls him too controversial. Publicly, nothing is said. Scripts disappear. Insurance companies hesitate to bond productions involving him. Producers claim schedules are tight. Phones stop ringing entirely. The blacklist is never formally handed to him. It doesn't need to be. He feels it in silence. Hedda Hopper writes again. She does not attack him directly, she praises others instead. Courageous patriots, she calls them. Men who understand their duty. Garfield reads those columns the way he once read scripts, searching for subtext. He understands now that the moment at Chasen's was not just a warning. It was a test. Would he fold early? Would he volunteer cooperation before being asked? He hadn't. And that decision followed him. By 1952, the strain begins to show. Friends notice he looks tired, thinner. His career stalls in a town that moves quickly without you. At home, the pressure grows heavier, financial concerns, public suspicion, private resentment. He insists he did nothing wrong. But Hollywood is not governed by innocence. It is governed by distance. He tries to produce independently, smaller projects, theater work. Studios hesitate to distribute them. The industry that once built him now avoids eye contact. He is not alone, others suffer similar fates, but Garfield's fall feels quieter, less dramatic, more suffocating. In May 1952, he attends a poker game at a friend's apartment in New York. He complains of feeling unwell, fatigued. He steps into another room to lie down. Hours later, he is dead. 39 years old. Official cause: heart attack. Some blame stress, some blame long-standing health issues. No official document connects his death to Washington, to Hopper, to that word spoken in 1947. But those who knew him speak of weight, of pressure, of something invisible that never lifted. Back in Los Angeles, Hedda Hopper continues writing. Her column runs daily. She never mentions the toast, never mentions Chasen's, never mentions the smile that vanished. Harry Cohn moves on to the next actor, the next contract, the next calculation. Hollywood resets. It always does. But something remains in that booth in 1947. If you walk into Chasen, in your imagination, into that red leather corner, you can still see it. The moment when a glass was raised. The second when a word turned into a future. Garfield did not shout, he did not refuse loudly, he did not storm out of Washington. He answered carefully. He drew one quiet line. And it cost him everything the industry could take. The fear in this story is not in the hearings, not in the microphones. It is in the earlier moment. The private one, where power announced itself gently. Hedda Hopper did not accuse him. She did not threaten him. She simply let him know he had already been weighed and found uncertain. In Hollywood, reputations are not destroyed with explosions. They are adjusted. Softly. Publicly. Irreversibly. Years later, the blacklist would be acknowledged, apologies would surface, historians would debate fairness and hysteria. But in 1947, in that booth, none of that was visible. There was only a glass, a word, and a smile that faded a fraction too slowly. John Garfield thought he was attending dinner. He was attending a verdict. And no one in the room needed to raise their voice for it to be heard. The story does not end with his death, because the mechanism that silenced him never disappeared. It only changed names. In every industry, there is still a moment when someone raises a glass, says something that sounds harmless, and lets you know the room has already decided. That is how power works when it does not want witnesses. Quietly, confidently, and always before you realize the hearing has begun.